My elderly mother's friend Dorothy had been the perfect companion for 2 years. She took Mom shopping, accompanied her to doctor appointments, and provided daily companionship. When Mom died, I discovered that Dorothy was living under a fake identity. Her real name was Michelle, and she was a professional elderly companion fraud artist who had stolen inheritances from 6 other elderly victims. My name is Robert Martinez. I'm 55 years old, and I'd just discovered that the woman I'd been grateful to have as my mother's friend had actually been systematically manipulating her for financial gain while appearing to provide genuine companionship and care. But what I learned about Dorothy Williams, whose real name was Michelle Cooper, would prove that my mother's stolen inheritance was just one piece of a much larger criminal enterprise that had been targeting vulnerable elderly people for over a decade. Standing in the attorney's office, reading my mother's will that left $300,000 and half ownership of her house to Dorothy Williams, I felt like I was staring at evidence of the most calculated betrayal imaginable. According to this document, the woman I'd known as my mother's closest friend had somehow convinced an 82-year-old woman with early dementia to leave her a fortune. But according to everything I'd observed about Dorothy's relationship with my mother, she was a caring companion who had genuinely enriched Mom's final years by providing friendship, assistance, and emotional support during a difficult period of declining health. The mother whose will was being read had lived alone since my father's death 5 years earlier, and had been increasingly isolated and vulnerable when Dorothy had entered her life as what appeared to be a godsend of friendship and companionship. To understand how Dorothy had been able to position herself to inherit my mother's wealth, simultaneously manipulating a vulnerable elderly woman, I need to explain how our family had come to trust her, and why we'd never suspected that Mom's companion was actually a predator. My mother, Elena Martinez, was 82 years old when she'd first met Dorothy Williams at a senior center activity program. 2 years before her death, Mom had been attending the center's social events as a way to combat loneliness and maintain social connections after Dad's passing. I met the nicest woman today, Mom had told me during one of our weekly phone calls. Her name is Dorothy, and she's about my age. She just moved to the area and doesn't know anyone. That's great, Mom. It's good for you to have friends at the center. She seems very sweet. We had lunch together and talked for hours. She lost her husband recently, too, so we understand what each other is going through. Dorothy had seemed like exactly what Mom needed, a peer who understood the challenges of aging in widowhood, and who could provide the kind of daily companionship that adult children often can't offer due to work and family obligations. Dorothy and I are becoming good friends, Mom had reported after several weeks. She lives alone, too, and we've been spending a lot of time together. What kind of things do you do? We go shopping, have coffee, watch movies. Sometimes she helps me with things around the house that are getting difficult for me to manage. Dorothy's assistance had seemed both appropriate and helpful. Mom had been struggling with some of the practical aspects of living alone: grocery shopping, household maintenance, transportation to appointments, and Dorothy's help had allowed her to maintain her independence longer. Dorothy is so thoughtful, Mom had said during one of my visits. She never makes me feel like I'm a burden, and she genuinely seems to enjoy spending time with me. I'm glad you have such a good friend. She's become like family to me. I don't know what I'd do without her. The relationship between Mom and Dorothy had developed quickly and intensively. Within 6 months, Dorothy was visiting daily, helping with errands, and had become Mom's primary source of social interaction. Dorothy knows more about what's going on with your mother than you do, Mom had said during one conversation, apparently repeating something Dorothy had told her. She's here every day, while you only visit once a week. I work full-time, Mom. I come by every week and call you every day. I know, honey. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that Dorothy understands my day-to-day life in a way that's different from family. The comment had made me slightly uncomfortable, but I'd been grateful that Mom had found such a devoted friend who was willing to provide daily companionship and assistance. Dorothy's involvement in Mom's life had gradually expanded beyond friendship to include help with more significant decisions and responsibilities. Dorothy helped me organize my medications, Mom had reported. She made a chart so I don't forget to take them. That's helpful. Just make sure you're still in control of your own medications. Of course I am. Dorothy just helps me stay organized. What about your doctor appointments? Are you still comfortable going alone? Dorothy comes with me now. She helps me remember what questions to ask and takes notes about what the doctor says. Dorothy's presence at medical appointments had seemed supportive rather than controlling, and I'd appreciated that Mom had someone to help her navigate increasingly complex healthcare decisions. But looking back, I realized that Dorothy's gradual integration into every aspect of Mom's life had been a calculated strategy to isolate her from family and position herself as the primary influence in Mom's decision-making. The first concerning change I'd noticed had been Mom's increasing dependence on Dorothy for basic decisions and activities. I need to ask Dorothy about that had become Mom's standard response to suggestions about social activities, household decisions, or even family visits. Mom, you don't need Dorothy's permission to have dinner with your own son. I don't need her permission. I just like to check with her because she knows my schedule and what I'm comfortable doing. Since when do you need someone else to manage your schedule? It's not like that, Robert. Dorothy just helps me think through things. She has good judgment. The second concerning change had been Mom's increasing criticism of family members and decreasing interest in maintaining relationships with people other than Dorothy. You don't visit enough, Mom had started saying during our weekly visits. Dorothy says that if you really cared about me, you'd make more time. I visit every week and call you every day. But you're always in a hurry to leave. Dorothy spends hours with me just talking and keeping me company. Dorothy doesn't have a job and family responsibilities like I do. That's exactly what Dorothy said you'd say. She told me that busy children always have excuses for not prioritizing their elderly parents. The third concerning change had been Mom's secretiveness about financial decisions and her unwillingness to discuss her will or estate planning. Have you reviewed your will recently? I'd asked during one of our conversations. It's been several years since Dad died, and you might want to make sure everything is up to date. Dorothy and I have talked about that. She knows someone who can help with legal matters. Mom, you already have an attorney. Why would you need someone else? Dorothy thinks I should get a second opinion about my estate planning. She says some attorneys don't really understand what elderly people need. What doesn't our family attorney understand? It's complicated. Dorothy explained it to me, but I'd have to ask her to explain it again. Mom's increasing reliance on Dorothy for financial and legal advice had been troubling, but I'd assumed it was a normal part of aging and hadn't realized that Dorothy was systematically isolating Mom from family influence while positioning herself as the primary advisor. Mom's death had occurred suddenly from a heart attack, which had prevented any final conversations about her intentions regarding Dorothy or her estate planning decisions. Your mother spoke about Dorothy constantly in her final months, the attending physician had told me. She considered her to be her closest friend and most trusted advisor. The reading of Mom's will 2 weeks after her death had been the first indication that Dorothy's influence had extended far beyond friendship into systematic financial manipulation. Mrs. Martinez has left specific bequests to her companion, Dorothy Williams, the attorney had announced. The sum of $300,000 from her savings and a 50% ownership interest in her residential property. 50% of the house? That's impossible. According to this will, which was updated 8 months ago, Ms. Williams is to receive half ownership of the house and a substantial cash inheritance. My mother had early dementia. How could she make major changes to her will? The will was properly witnessed and notarized. Mrs. Martinez appeared to understand the nature of the document when she signed it. The investigation I'd begun that day revealed the scope of Dorothy's predatory operation and the systematic methods she'd used to exploit vulnerable, elderly people while appearing to provide genuine friendship and care. Working with the Elderabuse Division of the District Attorney's Office and an investigator named Detective Lisa Thompson, I discovered that Dorothy Williams was actually Michelle Cooper, a professional elderly companion fraud artist who had been operating for over 12 years. Michelle targets elderly people who are socially isolated and gradually builds relationships that position her to inherit their money, Detective Thompson explained during our first meeting. She's perfected the art of appearing to be a genuine friend while systematically manipulating her victims' financial decisions. How many other elderly people has she defrauded? We've identified at least 8 elderly victims over the past 12 years who left substantial inheritances to Dorothy Williams or other fake identities she's used. The total value of stolen inheritances exceeds $2.1 million. How does she avoid detection? Because her victims die believing she was their best friend. Their families are often grateful that their elderly relative had companionship during their final years. Detective Thompson's investigation revealed Michelle's sophisticated methods for targeting vulnerable elderly people and manipulating them to change their wills. She identifies elderly people who are socially isolated, have substantial assets, and show early signs of cognitive decline, Thompson explained. She builds intense emotional relationships that make elderly people feel dependent on her friendship. How does she convince them to change their wills? She gradually isolates them from family relationships by suggesting that their children don't care about them. Then she positions herself as the only person who truly understands and appreciates them. The evidence Thompson uncovered showed that Michelle had been using multiple fake identities and had been operating similar fraud schemes across several states. Dorothy Williams isn't a real person, Thompson told me. Michelle Cooper has created at least 5 different identities that she uses to approach elderly victims in different communities. How long had she been planning to target my mother? Based on what we've found, Michelle researches potential victims extensively before making contact. She probably knew about your mother's financial situation and family relationships before she ever introduced herself at the senior center. But the most disturbing aspect of Michelle's operation wasn't just the inheritance theft. It was the psychological manipulation she'd used to convince vulnerable elderly people that she cared about them while she was actually planning to profit from their deaths. Michelle creates genuine emotional bonds with her victims, Thompson explained. The elderly people she targets really do believe she's their best friend, which makes the betrayal even more cruel. So my mother's feelings about Dorothy were real? Your mother's feelings were real, but Dorothy's were completely fabricated. Michelle was performing friendship while planning to steal your mother's inheritance. The legal proceedings against Michelle were complex because proving elderly financial abuse requires demonstrating that victims lacked the capacity to make informed decisions about their estate planning. Elder abuse cases involving inheritance manipulation are difficult to prosecute, explained Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh. But Michelle's pattern of behavior across multiple victims shows clear criminal intent. What evidence do we have? Financial records showing inheritance theft, fake identity documentation, and testimony from families of other elderly victims who lost inheritances under similar circumstances. Michelle was ultimately charged with 8 counts of elder abuse, multiple counts of identity theft, and numerous fraud charges related to inheritance manipulation. The trial revealed the scope of Michelle's predatory enterprise and the calculated methods she'd used to exploit elderly people's loneliness and vulnerability. Cooper specifically targeted elderly people who were experiencing social isolation and cognitive decline. Prosecutor Walsh explained during her opening statement. She used fake identities to build relationships that seemed genuine while systematically manipulating her victims to change their wills in her favor. The evidence presented during the trial showed that Michelle had collected over $2.1 million in inheritances from 8 elderly victims over 12 years. Each victim followed the same pattern. Prosecutor Walsh continued. Cooper would identify a vulnerable elderly person, build an intense friendship, isolate them from family, manipulate them to change their will, then disappear after they died, and she collected the inheritance. Michelle was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. She was also ordered to pay $2.8 million in restitution to the families of her victims. But for the families of Michelle's victims, the criminal conviction provided limited comfort. Most of the stolen inheritances had been spent or hidden, making full restitution unlikely, and the knowledge that their elderly relatives had been manipulated during their final years was emotionally devastating. The worst part isn't the money she stole, I reflected during my victim impact statement. It's knowing that my mother's final friendship was fake, and that she died believing someone cared about her who was actually planning to profit from her death. The experience fundamentally changed how I think about elder care and the vulnerability of elderly people to predators who exploit their need for companionship and social connection. Elderly people are particularly vulnerable to companion fraud because they often experience genuine loneliness and social isolation, explained Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a geriatrician who testified as an expert witness during the trial. Predators like Michelle exploit this vulnerability by providing what appears to be genuine friendship and care. The case led to increased awareness of elderly companion fraud and new protocols for monitoring sudden changes in elderly people's estate planning decisions. The most important protection for elderly people is family involvement that doesn't become intrusive, Dr. Rodriguez advised. Regular contact, awareness of new relationships, and gentle monitoring of financial decisions can help detect manipulation before it becomes criminal. 3 years after Michelle's conviction, I've learned to focus on the fact that Mom did experience genuine companionship and care during her final years, even though it was provided by someone with criminal intentions. Michelle stole Mom's money, but she couldn't steal the happiness Mom felt during their friendship. I reflected during a support group meeting for families affected by elder abuse. Mom died believing she had a devoted friend, and in some ways, that's what matters most. The companion who had appeared to provide my mother with friendship and care during her final years had actually been systematically manipulating her while planning to steal her life savings. Sometimes the people who seem most devoted to caring for our elderly loved ones are actually the ones planning to profit from their vulnerability and loneliness. And sometimes the most important protection we can provide for aging family members is our own continued involvement in their lives, even when they seem to have found caring companions who appear to meet all their social and emotional needs. Michelle Cooper had built her entire criminal career on exploiting the loneliness and vulnerability of elderly people using fake friendship to steal inheritances while making her victims believe they had found genuine companionship in their final years.